Hi, everyone. So here is Maureen Gibbons Varela. She's going to be doing painting a portrait of an individual with OSINT. Take it away, Maureen.
Thank you, Meg. I'll just turn on my camera for the very beginning here. So today I'm going to be talking about how you can use open source information to paint a holistic picture of someone's identity, values, and interests. Thank you for coming today. So just a little bit about myself. I have about a little over 10 years of project management experience, doing project management training and capacity building in nonprofits, specifically in areas of human security and global policy. Over the last couple of years, I began learning about InfoSec and working to make a career change. And only really recently did I discover that what I thought was me just piddling around on the internet looking into things was actually OSINT. So I am really thrilled to be here and to have this opportunity to share what I've learned with you, and I hope that you find it useful. When I do research on people, I really rely heavily on things that I've learned in life that are not really so much experiences from formal education or training. And I think that these are the kind of experiences that I've had that really are the things that help me out. I was a restaurant server for several years. I worked on a crisis hotline for survivors of human trafficking. And we would get phone calls from victims, survivors, perpetrators, family members looking for people that were lost, and people in all kinds of really difficult and often traumatic situations. And I've also had quite a few cross-cultural experiences, both in work settings and personal settings. And I think that what all of these things have in common is that they really force you to interact with a lot of people and a lot of different people from different backgrounds and different personality types. And to be successful in these situations, you really have to learn how to read people and understand them, and then predict what they will respond to and how they will respond. So this is just a short overview of what we will be talking about today. So why would you conduct OSINT on an individual? Why bother? I think probably a lot of people are really familiar with these. You can do it on yourself so that you can find out what kind of information other people could find out about you. If you're conducting a pen test, it would be useful for social engineering purposes. You're hiring someone. I think if you're applying for a job, it's always a good idea to know the organization that you're applying to work with, but it might help you in an interview to know how to establish rapport with your interviewers or your future team members. Activists and organizers have this interesting tension often where they want their movement to be local and inclusive and community-based. So they want to be open to different people participating, but they also sometimes need to ensure that people who are helping are operating in good faith. And there's activists all over the world who are pushing for changes that challenge established power dynamics, and in some cases have had their groups physically or virtually infiltrated by people either working on behalf of their government or corporations or whoever opposes their efforts. So doing some research on who it is that they're working with really makes sense for them. And then, of course, those conducting an investigation can use it. It's definitely something that you can do and can learn to do well, but should you? Really, it's important to determine at the outset what your goals are and what it is that you actually need to know before you start gathering information. You don't want to do any research that you really don't need to. So, you know, maybe for whatever your goals are, all you need to do is verify someone's identity. That's a lot less research than maybe if you're a pen tester and you really want to know about the person who is standing between you and the thing that you are trying to get access to. And it is actually really helpful to know that they have a lot of, you know, cats that they care for and they're Steelers fans, because that can help you establish rapport with them and get past them. I think the other thing to consider is your resources. This can be really time consuming, especially if you're going to do a deep dive and try to really get to know and understand someone. So it's good to check and make sure that this is where you actually want to put your time and your resources. In his book, Open Source Intelligence Techniques, Michael Bazzell discusses ethics. And the elements that he weighs are privacy, intent, and deception. And kind of in a nutshell, the advice is that the intent and the purpose of your search should help you, guide you when you decide whether to undertake it at all and the extent to which you go. Ethical considerations are really important because even though that what we're looking for is really all out there publicly, I think it's really important to still consider folks' privacy. When you're collecting information on someone, you are sometimes taking really small crumbs that they've left behind and scattered all over the internet and assembling them. And with every piece of information that you add, you make it easier to identify the person or to find them or just to generally expose them. For me, it's important to also consider the potential vulnerabilities that the person has. So there are some people for whom being identified and found is actually dangerous for them or puts them at risk of things that other people might not be at risk for. So that's another element that I think is really important to think about when doing this. So how do you get started? Well, you have to find the information about the person. So I've listed here some common things that I use. And up at the top of the list, I have some really basic factual stuff: name, email addresses, city where they live. And then at the bottom is more robust sources of information, you know, like social medias, blog, websites, spaces where they're really sharing a lot of information. So if I have something that is at the bottom of this list, I will start with that. And if I feel that I need to verify that it is authentic and it belongs to this person, I can use any of those small factual details that kind of end up at the top of this list to verify that the bottom ones are authentic. If I don't have any of the more robust kind of online presences, I will start with the factual things and start combining them in different ways and searching for them to see if I can find another kind of crumb that I can use to try to find another crumb and just try to make a trail and find these more robust online presences. I want to mention blogs specifically. If the person that you're researching writes a blog, read it. Even if it's boring, even if it seems really irrelevant, at least skim it. Their food blog might tell you more about themselves than it does about the local restaurant scene. So there can be some really good nuggets of information there. And finally, the biggest challenge that I come across with this is when people have been very careful to curate a professional presence online and they have really guarded their personal presence or completely eliminated it. It can be really hard to get an understanding of who they are. It's not always hopeless. You can sometimes bridge that divide of professional and personal, but you usually have to really go back to those small details or the basic facts and start researching combinations of those. So let's go into the different social media platforms and what they tell you about the people on them. I love Twitter. I think probably because Twitter is a place where you can make one or many accounts. You can follow literally anyone in the world. This is a platform where people tend to really express themselves. So, you know, kind of obvious, but based on what they tweet and retweet, you can find out a lot about their values, their political views, what subculture they're a part of, their sense of humor, maybe they're angry all the time. Something that I think is easy to overlook is checking out who they follow. It's rare that I find that checking who they follow doesn't tell me something. If you like scroll around a bit and have a good look at it, you will eventually find a pattern. This is all harder to do if the account is missing. Either it's protected or suspended or deleted, but it's not hopeless. You can check tweets that are cached by search engine. I usually, even if I've found their profile, I will just go to the search box and put their handle in anyway, so that I can pull up conversations that they've had with others. Their responses and their tweets will be missing, but the other side of the conversation will be there. And if they're really prolific, you can still get a good sense of what it is that they talk about and what it is they're interested in and who they're talking to. So something you have to ask on Twitter, is it a real account? I don't have a perfect answer to this. This is a really challenging thing. I do look for some indicators. So there's more bots and sock puppets and stuff as time goes on. So I check the date that the account was started, and the older, the better. A very new account might belong to the person that you're looking for, but it could be part of an effort to recreate their image, or it could be a secondary account that they have. There are other folks who know a lot more about this than I do, but definitely checking the number of tweets that a person has sent and the timing of them to see if you can find a time frame that is likely to be when they sleep is a way that people check authenticity. And then to check and see if it's who you're looking for. I've had luck sometimes if it's an account that doesn't have a ton of tweets, just checking to see what they've retweeted. Sometimes people will retweet like their employer or something, and if you have a LinkedIn, you can see that they did that at the same time that their LinkedIn says that they work there, so that can be a clue that this is probably the person you're looking for. And then just generally anything that indicates locations. So like interest in current events in a particular city, or following a particular sports team or something can give you an idea of where they either currently live or, you know, maybe they used to live there. So moving on to Facebook, I think because Facebook is a place where the intention is that you connect with folks that you already know in real life, a Facebook profile reveals different things about a person than a Twitter profile. Interestingly, most people do follow Facebook's terms of service and use their legal names, so you can find that. And sometimes you can get nicknames and maiden names out of it too. They'll put them in parentheses. You can check for a custom URL, and that might give you another nickname or a handle that they're using on another social media site. It is called Facebook, so you usually can see what they look like. And something nice about Facebook is that you generally have multiple photos of the same person and candids and stuff. I think a red flag for me when I'm looking up somebody is when I see one photo and it's the same exact photo used across multiple sites and I can't find anything else. because to me that suggests that that's an indicator that it could be a fake account and not really a real person, because it's pretty hard to find multiple stock photos of the same individual. This other stuff is pretty obvious, places they've lived. Some people put their schools and their jobs on there. Family and friends are an interesting little source of information. So let's say you're looking for someone who needs to exercise discretion because of their job. Oftentimes those folks don't really have Facebook pages, but that doesn't mean that their mom and dad don't, or that their spouse doesn't. And moms and dads can be very proud of their children, and they will often share, information about accomplishments or group photos at weddings and reunions and other family get-togethers, where you can kind of, you might find them and they have the same name, and you're like, well, that could be a different family. It could not be somebody who's related to them. But then you find that group photo and there they are standing next to their parents. So that's useful. It can provide verification of identity, maybe like where they're from. But I think generally also, if you're able to find like most of a family unit, or if you're able to find a spouse, you might also be able to get an indication of their potential value system and just sort of general cultural background. If everybody is sharing stuff that indicates that they have, I don't know, particular political views or something, chances are that the person you're looking for also does. And that's not to say that people don't disagree with their families, they definitely do. But it's a good starting point. So obviously, like, where do you find this stuff about? How do you figure out their values, their political view and stuff? Definitely through posts, shares, likes, comments, especially ranty comments. And I think also I really like the fundraisers, because those will sometimes get past privacy settings, and you can see if they've hosted a fundraiser or if they donated to someone else's fundraiser, what types of things they care about. So, it's a good thing that a lot of people have learned how to navigate the privacy settings of their Facebook profiles. So unless you're friends with someone, and you wouldn't be if you're trying to find out stuff about them, they will likely have some pretty good privacy settings. And the amount of stuff that you'll be able to see will be limited. But you can still scrape together some things. A lot of things that make it through the privacy settings are multiple profile photos. You can still get a good look at what they look like if they're putting themselves in their profile. And then filters that they've added, if you scroll back in the timeline, can show you what sort of trending topic they felt resonated with them. You can still usually see relationships, but my favorite section is the likes section. So if you go to the top of someone's profile, all the way over to the right of the white things in the toolbar, you have a more option. And if you click the drop down for more, there's a bunch of different things that appear there that most people don't even use. And one of them is frequently likes. And if you go to that page, you'll see this screenshot underneath there. And it will show you different pages that they liked. And if you have a look at this, is just a random screenshot that I took of somebody's. This tells you quite a bit about a person that, otherwise you don't have a lot of information. They liked Melania Trump's page, and Joe Arapaho, who's that sheriff from Arizona, who had a really hard anti-immigration stance. They're pro-gun. They are interested in the Police Benevolence Association where they are. So without knowing anything else, we have a sense of kind of what this person's view of things are. So then, of course, there are fake accounts on Facebook too. I personally feel like it's a little bit easier to suss out a fake Facebook account than it is a fake Twitter account. And I think that maybe it's not really worth it to worry about it so much, because the fake accounts look so much like a highly protected personal account, real account, and you're not going to get much aside from likes out of a highly protected account anyway. But I will just say that once I did find a group of fake profiles that someone had created, and he had set it up to make it look like they were a nuclear family. And so there were, it was, you know, when you stumble on it, it looks like you think, oh, this is probably the mom, this is probably the dad, that's probably the son, there's another kid. And he had even had photos posted and had the accounts comment on each other's posts. But the thing is that they really lacked a community. The whole point of Facebook is to connect with people, maybe people you haven't seen in a long time because you went to high school with them, people that moved to a different country. And so usually there's a bigger community around a real Facebook profile. And in this case, that was the thing that was really missing. So that's what I tend to look for if I'm unsure. LinkedIn, I think, you know, I think most of us are familiar with what you can find. There's only one headshot, but it is usually a headshot that's pretty clear. You can see their whole career, usually, if they've really filled out their profile. And sometimes you can see every place that they've ever lived since they were in high school till the present. And then a detailed timeline for all of those things. I have discovered over time that there's some nuggets of bonus info in LinkedIn, sorry. I really like to click the contact info link, and that's up at the top of the profile. Most people have set their privacy settings so that the only thing that shows is the link to the LinkedIn profile that you're currently looking at, so it's useless. But some people have a lot of stuff in there. And I think that my guess is that they set up their profile a long time ago and then kind of forgot that they put all that stuff on there. So you can find sometimes old blogs, personal Twitter handles, a different email address than the one that you already have if you have one, and sometimes even birthdays, which might be useful if you're looking for other social media handles. This is another site where you can check a personalized URL. Mostly it's not that useful on LinkedIn, but occasionally somebody will use like a nickname or something, and that might help you find other online presences of theirs. Definitely check the activity section. That is where anything that they've shared or any comments that they've made on LinkedIn will show up on their profile. You know, due to the nature of professional networking, most of the profiles are at least partially public. But that doesn't mean that some of them aren't protected. And when they are, they kind of look a little bit like this. You don't really have a picture or much information to go on. There are definitely a lot of fake profiles on LinkedIn, but I wouldn't say that it's safe to assume that if you're not seeing a kind of really fleshed out profile, that that's not a legitimate one. I see that people who are at the beginning stages of their careers or close to retirement often don't have a whole lot of stuff on there. So rather than trying to see if something is, you know, fake, I will kind of gauge my confidence, whether my confidence level in so far as how confident I am that it is real and authentic. Recommendations are a positive sign. So often people will make recommendations and they'll get a reciprocal one from the person that they wrote a recommendation for. And to me, that's a good sign because that's a whole paragraph that people are writing. Endorsements are useless. LinkedIn really pushes them and people click all kinds of stuff and they don't tell you anything. When I am really concerned that an account could be fake, I check into the workplaces themselves. I check inside LinkedIn to see if they have a company profile. Then I check and see if there's other people that work there. Then I will go to the website and I'll check and see if the website feels like it's a legitimate company. If it is, you might be able to find a profile of the person that you're looking for on the website, or you might be able to, do an internet search of them plus the company and find conference bios and all kinds of other things. If you land on a website that doesn't feel legitimate, that's a red flag for the profile that you were looking for. I came across some interesting news stories about an intelligence organization called Black Cube that was hired by Harvey Weinstein's lawyer, and also that seems to have somebody hired them to kind of try to meet with folks from Citizen Lab in Toronto. Citizen Lab works with human rights workers across the world. And what was so interesting to me about those news articles that were talking about how they were operating, what really stood out to me was that in both of those cases, the organization, even though it's staffed by former Israeli intelligence officers who have, lots of experience in this and are presumably very professional and have lots of resources. They pointed out that the LinkedIn profiles and the websites of the businesses that they created to link to the LinkedIn profiles were pretty superficial. And if you spent some time on their LinkedIn profile and on the fake company website, it revealed itself to be pretty shallow and not authentic, as long as you spent a little time with it. So that really made an impression on me. So just two more. I don't find Instagram to be very helpful. Sometimes you might get multiple photos of the person, which is helpful in, getting a sense that they're a real person. You might see some of this other stuff. One of the things that can be useful is more images to search for, particularly if it's unique to them, like artwork or unique artwork that they created or that somebody created for them, because people tend to be kind of emotionally attached to those and proud of them and might share them on different in different places. I absolutely love it when I can find someone on Reddit. Because it's really where people really tell on themselves. I have found that it's harder to identify folks on Reddit. People are generally using handles that don't lead back to them in real life. So it's usually not the first place that I look. I usually have to figure out a second handle that they have and start checking things, cross-checking things in different sites. But it is a good place to search for images that you found elsewhere. So in that way, it can be helpful to use with Instagram. So connecting the dots. So let's say you have like little scraps of information. What do they tell you when you combine them sometime? I like to combine a name with the city that the person grew up in, if I can figure that out. If you can get the high school that they went to, you might be able to find local news articles that tell you about their hobbies and interests. Local news loves to profile like high school kids, especially if they're like doing sports or in some club or something like that. So you might be able to find something like that from their past that can lead you on a different path. Sometimes you turn up people search pages, obituaries, or wedding announcements, and all three of those things can give you an entire list of family members. email addresses, you can connect to social media, account handles, sometimes things that the person has published themselves, and they've listed their emails so that you can contact them later. Talked about photos verifying that people are real. Social media handles might give you a nickname or birth dates, unfortunately. I mentioned art created for or by the person as being something that can connect accounts on different platforms. And I would just say also just generally interest in specific topics. If you can see, this takes a little bit of, sometimes it's really obvious. If it's a sports team, sometimes it's really obvious. But if you spend a little time like kind of perusing the posts that somebody has on Twitter or Facebook, you might kind of catch an interest that they have. And if you find other accounts that you're not really sure if they're theirs and you don't have a whole lot of personal information in the other accounts to attach them, you might still be able to make a pattern of, okay, it looks like both of these accounts are interested in news around this location, and they both have a particular interest in, I don't know, 90s rom-coms or something. And the more kind of things that you can add in that, the more confident that you can feel that those accounts are probably belonging to the same person. So once you've got all of this information, it's good to kind of stop and kind of assess how confident you feel that what you found is authentic. And I've talked about that all along, but how clear is the picture that you've gotten? Do the things that you found make sense for this person? Is the stuff that you've found balanced with what you need to know? Are you looking for relevant information, or have you kind of gotten lost and found stuff that you've got some information, but it's not really telling you what you need to know? So maybe you need to go and do a little bit more digging. Definitely, do you know more than you need to know is something to consider. I have had moments where I have stumbled across things that tell me about really personal events in somebody's life that I can only assume like really deeply shaped their life. Either, I was thinking about this and trying to think about what these things have in common with each other. You definitely know it when you see it. And I think that for me, these types of things fall into two different categories. They're either revealing information about immutable things about the person, characteristics that they can't change, that are just inherent to themselves, or they are things that have happened to them that they had no control over. So some examples of things that I've found have been like the death of a sibling or a child, the deportation of a close family member, evidence that a person used to be identified by a different gender. And so I think when you find stuff like that, it's really important to consider whether it's information that you need, and if it's not, if you can just let it go and not document it or use it for whatever it is that you're doing. I think often that kind of stuff is not necessarily needed. And when I find it, I will just keep moving. So here's the subjective part. Who is it that you see? Now you've got all this information. Who you see depends as much on you as it does on what you've found. And it depends on your perspective of the world. I think that this is the hardest part to really explain because it's very intangible. So I will give an example. I was researching someone who the information I had about him was his email, a personal website, and a Facebook account. He was in his mid-20s. He was a skilled professional. As his hobby, he was a painter. and he described himself as a foodie. So on his personal website, there was some stuff about, like his professional skills, some work that he had done. There was also a photo gallery of his artwork, which was very unique and really kind of striking, and a food blog. So the first thing I did, I skimmed the blogs. They're pretty boring. Most were all what you would expect, opinions about different restaurants that he'd been to. But towards the very end of one of them, it took a really sudden and unexpected turn and went on this livid rant about the immigration status of the owner of the restaurant. So that stood out. And then another thing that kind of stood out to me was a couple of the more recent entries talked about feeling depressed and lonely and sad about, specifically about being single, which I think are things that most people can relate to. So that was that. And then I went to the Facebook page. It was pretty typical. On the surface of it, the posts were mostly unremarkable. I went pretty deep down the timeline of the posts on the wall, mostly like school activities. But then I started to notice a pattern, just a little sprinkling of commentary on his own looks. And together it was sort of like a questioning of whether he was good looking enough. Not really clear what that means, like what good looking enough for what does that even mean? But it was right there on his Facebook wall, and that's not really the kind of stuff that people kind of put out for all their Facebook friends to see. It was a little subtle. He never said anything really like he felt ugly or something, but just this sort of weird, insufficiently good looking kind of language. It was enough to feel like a pattern. And once I saw that, the blog post about depression and the level of anger in the immigration commentary sort of started to feel more significant with these little details. So it felt like something that I needed to know more about. So I started looking for other profiles. I was having a really hard time. I found an Instagram handle, but it was a private account. I was searching all kinds of different combinations of things. But eventually it was a photo of one of his paintings that led me to his Reddit account. He had posted it on his Facebook, and then he had also posted it on Reddit and asked for people's opinions of it and said that it was his painting. So I found him on Reddit, and there I found a whole lot of stuff. I found several posts where he was arguing with people about race. He even took the time to write a paper where he analyzed some data that was out there. And he posted his paper and asked people for their opinions about it. And then when people, anybody who challenged his methodology or had an opinion that wasn't exactly what his was, he was arguing with them. And then I found a bunch of posts where he referenced being empirically good looking, and he used the word empirically. And he also was really in these posts correlating this idea of a provable good looks, like empirically good looks, with being deserving and owed a girlfriend, and a girlfriend that had the same level of empirically good looks. And the phrasing of these things was a little different than on his more public blog. It was not so much, it really went beyond a sadness and a loneliness that I think most people can relate to an indignation and confusion as to why the promise of being good looking, almost in scientific terms, means that you are supposed to get this reward. And that wasn't manifesting for him. And so that was clearly really frustrating. So sort of like distilling what I had found, these are some of the characteristics that he was displaying across the posts that he had. To me, together, these things sounded very much like the beginnings of incel behavior and belief. So for anyone who doesn't know, incel is a term that is short for involuntary celibate. Wikipedia has a really nice, succinct definition of incels as members of an online subculture who define themselves as unable to find a romantic or sexual partner despite desiring one. And then Wikipedia lists these characteristics. The bottom one here, obsession with male model look, I lifted from an article written by Alice Hines for New York Magazine called Incel Plastic Surgery, where she had gone onto different forums and met folks who identify themselves as incels and discovered that they were getting extreme plastic surgery in order to meet this very rigidly defined idea and ideal of what they should look like. And their purpose in doing that was to find romantic partners who would be deserving of how good they looked after the surgery. So just on the right side here, I have italicized the things in the list under characteristics of incels that really matched up with what I found on the person. And I didn't find maybe for his characteristics, some of the things weren't as intense as the most intense descriptions of incels. So I was seeing that he had some resentment. I saw that he had self-pity, but I was not really sure that I was seeing any self-loathing, at least on the stuff that I found. And he was definitely preoccupied with meeting a rigid standard of good looks. Whether that crossed over into obsession, I don't know, that's a matter of opinion. So I like this example because I think that because this is really subjective and we are making, in this case, like you do end up making judgments about people. I like to take a list of indicators, think about indicators of certain things and try to find those indicators the same way that these two lists kind of match up, as opposed to would I apply this label to this person. I don't know if this guy's an incel. I don't know if I will ever feel comfortable defining somebody as a label, but I can definitely feel confident listing 5 or 6 characteristics and saying, here's the evidence that these characteristics exist. So that's my approach. So, you know, I think it's good to be skeptical. And so I want to talk about this kind of in bigger terms. I want to do a little bit of an exercise. So I would like you to take a look at this first picture and tell me who drives this car. You just take a minute and you can share in the chat if you like, or you know, just think about it yourself. I think this one is pretty quick. People will feel pretty confident quickly. For me, when I look at this car, my assumptions are that this is a car that most likely belongs to a young single man. And this might not be everybody's assumption, but when I see the color of that car, I think this person's definitely somebody who drives too fast. And I think that probably a lot of you have some of the same thoughts. You know, a Dodge Charger is a muscle car. The photographer knew this when he took this picture because he has us staring down the bumper of this car. And then think about who drives this car. Probably not the same person. For me, I don't really find myself thinking about a particular gender, but I look at this and I think this person probably lives in the city, definitely doesn't have kids because it's such a small car, and to go push it a little further, I would probably bet that they love to go to brunch and do like fun social things. And if you, kind of do some research on the branding and the marketing of these cars, those are the types of people that they're marketed to. And my point here is that we are all marketed to on a constant basis. And the conclusions that are made based on our demographics are similar to the ones that you can make when you are doing OSINT on somebody. And this works. This makes big money for these companies. And I would say, just as a last point about this part, because we are so used to being marketed to and we understand brands on an intuitive level, we already have the skills to do this, the broad strokes of these skills. So how do you hone your skills in this? This is definitely just my point of view on this, but I think that the most important thing that you can do is get to know people. And I don't mean get to know your friends, because we as humans all gravitate towards people that we feel we have a lot in common with. And those are the folks that we choose to hang out with, that we want to get to know deeply. What I mean when I say get to know people is get to know all different kinds of people. And I think that these are some ways that you can do that. Any jobs that interact with the public, specifically if you do not have in that role, you don't have a choice of who you get to interact with, they come to you. If you're on a customer service line, they call you, you have to answer. They sit down at your table and you're a server, you have to talk to them and you have to sell to those people. You don't get to pick. Definitely seeking out cross-cultural interactions. And the thing about culture is that it is much more than just national origin. Culture has many layers and is shaped by, yes, national origin, race, class, your community, the region you grew up in. It's very, very complex. And when you do have experiences where you are working with or doing something with somebody from a completely different background and culture, and you come away from that, you start to get a better understanding of your own and your own lens that you're seeing the world through. It's not objective. It's actually shaped by your own culture, and that is really helpful. Twitter is a great resource. It's free. You get to follow whoever you want and people that you might not meet in your personal life, and influencers and experts on all different types of things. You got InfoSec Twitter, K-pop Twitter, you got romance writers Twitter I stumbled on a little while ago, and these people are experts in their field, and they just have lots of different opinions and thoughts to share. And they have their own sort of memes and acronyms for things, and it's good to get to know different subcultures. Definitely read widely. I think fiction is the best for this, because well-written fiction is usually very well-developed characters, and it's the characters that drive the plot. So you can learn a lot about people just in a book, which sounds corny, but it's totally true. And then finally, be curious about symbols, acronyms, memes. When you find something you don't know what it means, I always look it up so that I know later in case it's relevant. And lastly, I'll say just be conscious of your own bias. To the extent that you can, know your own biases. Know your limits. Be open to being totally wrong. I think it's okay to feel confident, but you should always leave the door open for you to have completely gotten it wrong. Otherwise, you might be missing things, or you might misjudge somebody. I think it's really important to remember that you can lose perspective as you're going down the rabbit hole. And it's easy once that happens to start assigning meaning to things where meaning doesn't exist. So I think a good way to handle this is to take a break and review what you've found later. And finally, it's good to have somebody who can give you feedback, somebody to bounce these things off of, and to the extent that you can, get to know and keep in mind that person's worldview and their blind spots and their biases, because that will definitely affect their opinions on what you've found and their inputs and feedback. So that is all I have. Thank you very much for coming and listening to me. I hope it was interesting, and I think we have maybe 1 or 2 minutes or something. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If we run out of time for that, I can be on the Discord too, and I'm just Maureen GV on the Discord.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Maureen. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yep.
All right, great. Yeah, so Omnium asked in the channel, what are your top technical challenges beyond the research aspect of OSINT? So top technical challenges beyond the research aspect.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. I can answer personally, and that is that I do not yet have really a lot of skills in using, like, I don't know how to write like a script or something that could help me kind of parse loads of information quickly like some other folks do. But I'm not sure that that's an answer to your question, because that's specific to me and it might not be to you.
No, that sounds like along the lines of what they were looking for. Automation aspect probably for some folks is a big thing. So yeah, that sounds pretty valid. Jones today asked, what do you do when you hit a complete dead end in your pursuit?
So I definitely hit complete dead ends sometimes. And so I think that the answer to that comes from the context that you're working in. So if you, let's say you're gonna hire somebody and that's why you're doing this, you're probably doing this before you talk to them. So the next step is really just talking to them and knowing what you don't know. And sometimes, you know, maybe you might actually, what you get out of it might be types of things to look for or questions to ask or gaps that you want to fill with your interview questions. All
right, that's great. And then Omega Blue 24 asked, any advice to learn more about OSINT?
Well, I think Michael Bizel's book is really good. So that is one that I think probably really helps, especially with the technical side of it. I think I definitely have more to learn. I have found, though, that when I have come across something that piques my curiosity, even if it's not immediately relevant to me, I will read it, and then sometimes it pops up later. So an example of that, I mentioned the Black Cube articles. I didn't read those thinking that I was going to be able to use it later. I read it because I thought it was fascinating, and then some things stood out to me. Or the article about the in-cell plastic surgery, I was like, I couldn't pass it up. I really needed to read it. I thought it was so interesting. And then months later, it turned out to be a piece of knowledge that was really helpful to me.
Thanks so much, Maureen. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you all so much.